philosophers talk to their times. So you know why you should read Spinoza, but how? In this piece, I'm going to assume you are not a scholar. You're rather a troubled mind in these horribly difficult times of ours, thinking, how do I understand what is going on? How can I comprehend what is happening to my friends? How can I keep myself free? That is who I think I'm assuming you are. Oh, if you are a Spinoza scholar, I will point out as we go through one or two stratagems I use to read him. So how do you read Spinoza? First of all, I'm afraid I must talk quickly about translations. There's one to avoid, and then two very good ones for different sorts of people. So the one to avoid is the early 19th century Yule translation. It's bad, don't do it. He translates words wrong. Do not use it. It's still printed. It's all right, I have a copy of it. But then I've had every edition of Spinoza that had ever been translated into English. Oh, I should have said, you don't need to read Spinoza in translation if you understand medieval Latin. His Latin isn't hard. I also have a Latin copy, or I had a Latin copy for many years. It's all right, you can do it. But given that you're likely to read him in translation, there are three good translations. There's the Parkinson's edition, which is scholarly and well written, and interestingly enough, he draws upon an earlier edition by a kind of poetic philosopher called Boyle, who translates Spinoza right at the end of the 19th century, that Parkinson edited the edition of. And it's all right, it's very readable. But it isn't what I would start with. If I was not a scholar, I would always read the Shirley translation. And I read Shirley because I actually think it is accurate, reasonably, and literate. It's easy to read. And that is what you want. You don't want the text getting in the way. If you are a scholar, though, there is a work of towering genius in the Spinoza translation, as a Spinoza translation, and that is the Curley translation. That's the Penguin Classic edition, and it is a work of towering genius because it keeps a literal transliteration. So he always uses the same English for the same piece of Latin, so it's consistent throughout on its words, which the others aren't actually. Unfortunately, that does mean that some of the English becomes horribly burdened as it tries to register in English what the Latin is saying. So it's great if you're a scholar, but if you're a normal human being trying to work out what a philosopher is saying, probably harder. Your next is your point of approach to Spinoza. Now, a lot of scholars, at any rate, and also just lay people, will have encountered Spinoza through two or three other places. I just want to account two honest encounters with him that I've met people who then went on to read Spinoza. The first is the analytical approach of philosophers like Bennett and, to a degree, Curley, because Curley does his own essay on Spinoza. Particularly Bennett, which has had a vogue for a while. He writes this book, probably end of the 80s, which is an analytical philosopher's account with Spinoza. It is honest. He marks Spinoza's homework. He understands him as if he was a colleague analytical philosopher in his university. He doesn't understand him in anything historical. It's kind of interesting because he's trying to use Spinoza to help his own philosophy. But as a work of scholarship, it's questionable. It's a work of interpretation. Sometimes it's ludicrous. But worth reading, perhaps, but not worth colouring your opinion. The second is the remarkable essay written in 1977 at the end of his second major encounter with Spinoza by the great philosopher Gilles Deleuze. Now, the thing about Gilles Deleuze, who I've talked about before, he is one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. And therefore, he measures his mind. He changes his opinion through in-depth Spinoza readership. Therefore, this essay, written as which was a lecture, public lecture in 1977, and so really, really readable and understandable, will give you a chink into Spinoza. But do understand, he's spinning Spinoza. He's using him to understand how his own thought is going. It is usually published in a book called Practical Philosophy. I'm being jumped at now because the dog's bored. She's not so interested in Spinoza and thinks I've gone on too long about scholarship. Anyway, Spinoza and Us, you can find it online and look it up. So how should you read Spinoza? Well, Ethics, written in Euclidean as a Euclidean set of proofs with 5 books. If you are a layperson, for God's sake, don't read the first 2 books to start off with. The book will drag you in because he will always put you back and make you reread proofs anyway. So you do not need to start at the beginning. Where would I start? If I was a layperson, I would either start with book 3 or book 4. Book 3 is worth doing. That is the book where Spinoza talks about human emotions. He lays out a theory of what human essence is. That is very understandable to the modern mind. And talks about the conatas as striving to exist and to be in a way that any adolescent boy would go, oh yes, that's my thoughts, I understand that. It is very accessible. And then he takes you through how that creates love and fear and desire and all the rest of it. It's readable. It's readable in the same way that Bleak House by Dickens is readable. You have to commit to read it. But as you apply it to your own humanity, you'll see what he's doing. Book 4, usually called the Book on Human Servitude, starts off with an absolutely agonizing account. That's, again, I would always think at that point as like Hardy. It's how humans are caught, how they struggle to make themselves better. And the more the struggle, the more they're caught. And why all thy reason and all thy piety and all thy wit cannot save you if your emotions rage and you become ferocious and start to chase your tail. Book 4 then carries on with an account of why reason won't save you. But beyond that, it ends with a vision. Because in book 4, he starts to think about how you can use common notions to reach to your fellow humans. And through reaching your fellow humans, begin to understand yourself, not as a single soul, a being, me, a rage to exist. Oh no. But in the very middle of your humanity. As a project of reason, but also a project of an encounter with the world. He ends then with a set of propositions that takes you through how you could begin to be free by thinking of yourself as a social person in a living world. And then you have the most remarkable book 5. And if you read nothing else ever in philosophy, read book 5 of Spinoza. You see, that's the book where he spends the first, I think it's about 14 propositions, laying out how you can set yourself individually free in any but the worst of circumstances. Cognitive therapists will always cite Spinoza, the good ones will, as one of their great founders. But for me, Spinoza says it better, earlier, and says more of it. How you can then train your mind so that you don't endlessly fall into conspiracy traps or fears. How you can separate lies from fiction. And then all of a sudden he jerks you, Spinoza does, in an appendix into the second half of that book. And that second half book is the vision of eternity. An eternity without immortality. How you are always part of God. How you are always then part of the eternal middle. That which is constructing itself. Giving it its unity in its own construction. How you exist then not as one thing, but within something. You're always in the middle of another, in another, of another, with another. And being in the middle with another is being there with a friend. And so it is the point where Spinoza tries to persuade you to befriend creation itself. And only once I've read that would I begin to think about going back to book 2 first, and then finally book 1. Book 1, you see, is very technical philosophy. He's trying to take on Plotinus and the great philosophers of his day, and needs a lot of interpretation to understand, is what I think I would say. It's very easy to be totally bamboozled by it. So let's keep it to the last. How should you read Spinoza? I always read him with an open heart. I always read him when I want to think about the world. I always read him when the dawn doesn't rise. and I feel dark. Because how do I read him? I read him as a way to set my mind free, insofar as I can, in this strange world of ours.